Hello friends, I welcome you all on behalf of SAHA, South Asian Humanist Association. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jyotsna Palwai, the President of South Asian Humanist Association. Now, why do we think it is important to have SAHA? Today, South Asia, which is Afghanistan, the countries Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bhutan, Bangladesh and Nepal, constitute like 1/3 of the humanity. And here in US, Canada, England, UK and Germany, as we know, there is a huge concentration of South Asian immigrants, mainly from Indian subcontinent and Pakistan. And then we see a serious threat to humanistic and secularistic values in these countries. These countries are also now a hotbed of religious fundamentalism. We find at a time when human values, human rights, separation of state and religion, advancement of science and rational thinking is under serious attack constantly, and when efforts are underway to muzzle scientists and suppress their work, and when a barrage of alternate facts of all sorts are being promoted with impunity, we think a defense needs to be created to protect and sustain all these values for the betterment of a civilized society. We think that immigrants of South Asian countries, usually in the name of protecting their culture, fall back on religion. The confusion of culture and religion is what is causing this community to send huge amounts of money back to their country. This naturally influences the image of the country. However, there are many secularists, humanists who have no one to associate and socialize, and they end up in the socializing in the temples here. And that's the reason why we felt that there is a need to form a group and engage the community to foster these ideas forward and take these ideas forward. We are organized as a South Asian Humanist Association is organized as a We are organized as a civil society groups to create community for ourselves. We wish to preserve our culture as non-religious persons, and we recognize the rich variety of traditions with humanist secular traditions themselves, both in literature as well as arts. We exist to offer solidarity and support to each other. We develop services for our members like rites of passage or solidarity support in distress, or arrange for donation of cadavers, whereas the humanist has expressed such a desire. We stand for the freedom of religion and belief for all, including those who wish to have a no religion in personal life. We call for secular states as a guarantee for equal treatment of all in society with fairness and equality, and to end discrimination. We do not accept as just blasphemy laws or laws that ensure religious ideas special protection and privilege. Our methods are educational. We reject violence as a means of social change. We conduct educational programs, represent our interests to the authorities, undertake legal action, organize public lectures, meetings and conferences, cultural programs, and outreach on TV. The large-scale migration of Asian population has been a noted phenomenon, and it is clear that the migrants from South Asia to Europe and North America have no support in place of the hail from non-religious communities. Politicians and public opinion makers too are blind to the existence of secular, non-religious, progressive people amongst the migrants. This marginalization results in stereotyping of migrant population as being uniformly religious, and this is disadvantageous and an impediment to the formulation of policies to enable natural integration of immigrant groups into the mainstream society. Socialization has to happen around temples and other places of prayer and worship, and there are no neutral cultural spaces where the immigrant groups may expose themselves to their culture, learn different art forms native to their place of origin, and also learn languages or simply engage with community issues that specifically matter to the immigrant communities. In the absence of these neutral places for community congregation, militant religious leaders are the ones who have managed to polarize immigrants not around larger civic and nation building and other citizenship issues, but around religious identity. As modern and well-educational resources are found to be wanting, SAHA will cooperate and help with production of modern educational resources, leadership training, programs for creating in our humanist communities individuals who are firmly committed to global citizenship and responsible social activism. SAHA will also explore how to create means of broadcasting of our news and views across the internet at a time when mass media access to our views is becoming even more difficult. And with that, that's the reason why we chose this topic today, the worldwide rise of nationalism and religious fundamentalism. To address this, we organized a panel discussion, and today we have in our panel Dr. Sharon Welch. Dr. Sharon Welch is a professor of religion and society. She is a senior fellow of the Institute for Humanist Studies, a member of the International Steering Committee of Global Action to Prevent War, and a member of the Unitarian Universalist Peace Ministry Network. She has held positions as professor and chair in religious studies. She has been a professor of women and gender studies and adjunct professor of educational leadership and policy analysis at the University of Missouri. She also has written numerous books and took a lot of awards. I welcome her onto the stage. I then have our founder, Babu Gogineni. Babu is an Indian humanist, rationalist, human rights activist who served as an executive director of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. He is one of the best-known humanists in international circles. He is the founder of South Asian Humanist Association and Indian Humanists. He is also the founder and owner of Skill Guru, a training organization and private business. In his activism, Babu always campaigns against established privilege and abuse of rights done in the name of religion. During his time with the IHU, he led IHU's worldwide campaigns for the protection of Bangladeshi writer Taslima Nasreen, and then bringing Pakistani freethinker Yunus Shaikh to safety in Europe. In India, he successfully led the campaign of rehabilitation and protection of rights of Shambhavi, a child who has claimed as a reincarnation of a Buddhist goddess. In 2003, Babu was one of the signatories to the Humanist Manifesto. He also identifies as an enthusiastic bride. Babu is also a prolific writer in English, French, and Telugu. He was a columnist for Hyderabad-based daily newspaper Postnoon and wrote many columns. He has also hosted a multi-language TV series called The Big Question with Babu Gogineni, offering a humanist perspective on science and civilization. Some of those DVDs are on display. However, they are in Telugu. If any of you are from back from Telugu community, you can have them. Babu is a public communicator, and he travels domestically and internationally to spread humanism and awareness of social issues. He's a regular TV commentator in India and abroad on topics of superstition, science, humanism, and human rights. I welcome Babu onto the stage. We now have Hemant. the most, he's well known in the atheist circles of American community here. Hemant is an American atheist, activist, blogger, and an author. He is well known for selling his soul on eBay, eating babies, and not being an asshole to believers. Hemant was a math teacher, but he is now a full-time atheist activist. His YouTube channel, The Atheist Voice, is a popular choice if you are looking for a popular atheist. Hemant's blog, Friendly Atheist, is currently hosted on Patheos. He features several issues like separation of church and state, gay rights, explaining the origin of universe, and constantly speaks on women's rights. He has written several books, which include I Sold My Soul on eBay, The Young Atheist Survival Guide, Helping Secular Students Thrive. I welcome Hemant onto the stage. Lastly but not least, Howard Katz. He is a board member of American Humanist Association since 2011. He has been a humanist celebrant for over 7 years. Howard has been active with American Civil Liberties Union and was awarded the ACLU of Illinois Volunteer of the Year Award. He is a former officer of Illinois National Organization for Women, board member of the local Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and board member of Humanists of West Suburban Chicagoland. He's held multiple public offices and is currently parliamentarian of his country, Democratic Organization, and holds the elected office of Township Clerk. He has been a member of the SAHA for over 30 years after being introduced to humanism in his 20s. I welcome Howard onto the stage. Glenda will be moderating today's panel, and with that, I'll hand over the stage to her. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, excuse my youth. My printer didn't work, so I'm reading off my phone. So my name is Glenda, and I'm happy to welcome you to the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. For those of you who don't know who we are, our organization is a humanist community that provides a space for those who wish to have the support system traditionally provided in a house of worship without the prerequisite of worshiping anyone or anything. We have many groups who meet on specific interests, including movies and books, run social events, and engage in community action around Chicago. We have a Golden Rule Sunday School for those who wish to provide their children with morals without dogma. We also have a Sunday program series, which members can learn from experts in fields related to science, humanities, the arts, and current events. Well, first of all, I want to thank the South Asian Humanist Association, or SAHA, for reaching out to us and organizing the event. And more specifically, we wouldn't be sitting here with this fantastic panel without Joinsa, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, who assembled the panel, secured the date, and just overall made this entire thing happen. So I'd like to extend my thanks for her work as well as from the society. So thank you so much for putting this together. This is a lot of work. So welcome again, everyone. The worldwide rise of nationalism, the worldwide rise of nationalism and religious fundamentalism. I think many of us has noticed the change in tone when it comes to international news in recent years. A lot of national news has been focused on events centered in mostly Muslim countries, whether it's on the attacks perpetrated on civilians in Islamic State, the increasing reports of honor killings, or even the response by other Muslims in hopes of keeping the peace. These peaceful responses include the multiple Not in My Name campaigns. There's one based in the United Kingdom that's actually wishing to disconnect with a lot of terrorist attacks, and there's also one based in India, which is actually trying to disconnect, what's the best way to put it? Essentially, there's a lot of attacks happening to Muslims in India, and so the Not in My Name campaign is trying to prevent continued attacks on Muslims based on their faith. These concerns about national identity, however, and religious rule do not affect only one region or one faith. The recent election in the United States have shown that there are issues that affect us in our backyard and not just in faraway countries. It has been theorized by many that the resurgence of homegrown terrorists in America started after 9/11 when the FBI created a vacuum for them by moving resources to focus on outside threats coming over to the United States. And these groups, now growing with less scrutiny, are marrying their Christian values with the edicts of hate-filled nationalism. The Brexit election last year, as well as the recent French presidential election, are also very telling in how our current world overall has an issue. The Western world still has a significant population who feels that their respective countries are completely married with their respective beliefs. With major players across the globe dealing with the growth of these ideals, there's almost no country that is untouched by these trends. So tonight we're pleased to have our speakers here to illuminate on these issues as well as other angles on the worldwide rise that may not be well known to us or the public at large. So we're going to ask to have our panelists speak about in 5 to 7 minutes about their position on the issue, and then after that converse with them, and then over the last 20 minutes we will have question and answer. My hope is that I won't have to intercede too much. So in no particular order, since Howard's the one that's next to me right now, I'll have him start. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay. First of all, let me give you a thumbnail definition of humanism, since several people in the room may not be familiar with it, and I don't have it memorized. I should after 12 years. But humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that, without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. Now, it's that last line that I think becomes very important when we start talking about the idea of nationalism and fundamentalism. Neither one of those positions aspire to the greater good of humanity. When it comes to nationalism, we saw a very benign form of nationalism just a few hours ago, actually, the 4th of July celebrations. That is, in one form, one idea is the idea of nationalism being, our nation being very proud of each other. That's benign. The not so benign idea are the things like the extreme views that your group is better than my group, that your religion should tell everybody else what should or shouldn't be done. That touches on fundamentalism, but it goes actually into the idea of nationalism. Christian identity is a very strong nationalistic viewpoint that wants to actually either carve the U.S. into an area for their viewpoint, or they just want to be able to throw out of the country those people they think are inferior to them. There are several different ones that we've seen, and it's amazing some of the polar opposites. Obviously, a lot of us are familiar with the white supremacists. Interesting, my studies when I was looking into the idea of this, it isn't just an idea of one race versus another. It also gets into regionalism. A lot of people in the South still can call it the war of northern aggression. They still talk about the idea that we took care of and threw out their idea of. You are going to tell me if I speak overtime, aren't you? Because I have a tendency to do that. Okay. So you get that. You get the white supremacists, but then you get the black separatists. And we saw that not too many decades ago on the south side of Chicago. People who wanted to form their own nation separate from anybody else. You get the people who think that religious freedom means that they have the right to set up a theocracy in their part of the country. So we go from there, from nationalism, and as far as I'm concerned, then you get into fundamentalism. Am I taking up what you guys were going to be talking about? Okay, I just didn't want to step on anybody's toes. From a humanistic point of view, I'll short stop myself. From a humanistic point of view, none of these things are going to be something that's going to promote humanity's goal of advancement. And when you get into fundamentalism, obviously you're talking about people who are using it from a religious point of view, and since humanism says without theism or other supernaturalism, that right there negates the idea of being open to the idea of any kind of fundamentalism. So we work on the idea of We want to have each person fulfill their own abilities to the best they can without the need for religious overtones. And obviously, from a U.S. point of view, that means adherence to things like, the First Amendment. Small idea. So I think I'm pretty much at that point. So your turn. Cool.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. I just want to talk about where I'm coming from on this. I've been writing about atheism online for the better part of the past decade. And so I'll be honest with you, when I first started writing about religion, I did not pay much attention to what was going on outside the United States. It didn't really seem to concern me very much. And at the time, we were living under a conservative Christian president. It's not like we didn't have our own issues back home. So I just wasn't paying much attention to what was going on outside of the country. In 2013, I think that started to change for me. And the reason is I heard about a guy named Asif in Bangladesh. He's about my age. He also wrote about atheism online, and he was attacked because of it. Seriously attacked. Several people came after him with knives. And by the way, I'm going to read to you from my phone too, because that's where my notes are. One cut went 6 centimeters into his body. Another one went 4 centimeters into his body. He needed 53 stitches. And he made it out alive. And somehow it didn't end there for him, because after he was let out of the hospital, he was basically taken to jail for blasphemy for what he had written. And that was disturbing because, it's the weird saying in this setting, but for the grace of God, right? He lived there, I did not. So later that year, this is also in 2013, I heard about a man named Dr. Narendra Dabholkar. He fought superstition in India for a long time. And all of a sudden, he was assassinated, broad daylight. This is a guy who was pushing for a bill in his community, a legal bill, that would basically criminalize people who were duping you through superstition just to get your money. So we talk about like psychics and trying to lie to you to get your money. He wanted that to stop. They assassinated him as that was going on. And if there's any silver lining to that at all, it's that after the attention of that action, the state passed that bill. And things got worse progressively from there. So in 2015, this sort of thing started happening on a regular basis. And as someone who tries to follow this news, I couldn't avoid it if I wanted to. So in 2015, there was a man named Dr. Abhijit Roy who was assassinated, slaughtered basically at a book signing, more or less, in Bangladesh. From that point on, in 2015, this sort of thing started happening month after month, like on a regular basis. And it's kind of scary to think about what did they do, if anything, if I can even ask that question, to deserve whatever they got. Obviously, the answer is nothing. But all they were doing was speaking out. They were asking questions about religion. They were challenging religious dogma. And that was too much for certain people. In some cases, I know I'm glossing over a lot of names here, but there were a lot of them, and they were killed in a short amount of time. Some atheists were put on a hit list. Some of them fled to other countries for asylum. Some of them had to leave their families to get away from people who were trying to kill them. Others, I'm sure, just decided it'll be easier if I just stop speaking out, which is what they want you to do, really, right? And this wasn't just atheists as the victims either. There were people simply associated with atheists, people who helped them publish their books, who were also attacked. And so when I learned all of this was happening, it quickly came to me that this is not an anomaly. This is not one violent act. This is part of a trend, and this is a scary trend that's happening. And by the way, I should point out, these are not just radical Muslims doing this either. These were people who were Hindu. These attacks have happened in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. I haven't even mentioned Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I think this kind of thing happens when religious extremism takes over the mindset of a lot of people. And that includes government officials who feel that a need to protect these ideas is more important than protecting people who criticize those ideas. That's something, I don't care what you believe in or don't believe in, that's something all of us should care about and work against. We often hear talk about religious freedom in this country, but it usually tends to mean religious freedom only for Christians. But the religious freedom we should all care about is the ability to think what you want to think, criticize what you want to criticize, because ideas are supposed to be criticized, right? And we need to push for government officials to recognize that, to condemn that everywhere. And there are ways to help them out. I hope we'll get into that too. One last thing I want to mention. According to the Pew Research Center, 26% of the countries in the world have laws against blasphemy. 13% of them penalize apostasy if you leave your religion. The punishments range from money to death. And this is not, yes, it happens in the Middle East and it happens in North Africa, but it also happens in countries you may not expect. I mean, Ireland still has a blasphemy law on the books. New Zealand has one. Denmark had one until last month. And Germany recently fined an atheist $500+ in their currency for anti-Christian bumper stickers on his car. So this isn't about just what happens in certain countries. This isn't one region. This isn't one group. This is a mindset that is all over the world, and it's something we should all be aware of, and it's something we should all work against.
I want to bring to our group here 3 sages of humanity who have long left us in the last century. The first is the great poet from India, Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore, talking about nationalism in his times, he said that was simply idolatry of geography. And yet Tagore's 3 songs became anthems for 3 countries, the only individual to have ever contributed 3 national anthems to 3 countries. All the 3 glorify geography and no ideas at all. The other person is the great Albert Einstein, who says that nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of humanity. And the last one is Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm says nationalism is our form of incest, our idolatry, our insanity. Patriotism is its cult. Just as love for the individual which excludes love for the other is not love. Love for one's country, which is not for love for humanity, is not love, but idolatrous wishes. I think these 3 sages summarize for us what dark forces are gathering again. When you are told America is great, when people in my part of the world are told that they should think of an imaginary past, become nostalgic about it and fanatic about it, the same dark forces are being roused. Now, why is this a dangerous trend? Because when they were warning 70 years ago, it seemed like a new path was being set for humanity, and we seem not to have followed that. Most of the time, when we are talking about nationalism, we are also tackling problems of racism and xenophobia. I think when we talk about the current problems, we have to consider that there has been a globalization of the market, not accompanied by a globalization of the mind. Now, this has meant that there have been no universal human values or universal human rights standards beyond those that countries pay lip service to in United Nations declarations. So when the modern culture of human values does not become the active culture of a society or a nation, we have this challenge. And this is a challenge which, to my mind, has been quickened mostly because of badly handled globalization, which has seen the rest of the world, which was not Western, as simply a market, as something to exploit, where you can sell things. Now, this has led to people associating democracy, science, and freedom and human rights with imposed wars because of struggles to have control over territory, especially the ones where there is lots of hydrocarbon fuels. So there is a sense of antagonism towards the countries which should normally have been praised for having democracy and human rights and for having espoused universal human values. That is a reality. Now, we also have the other problem, that religion in many of the new countries of the world is intimately linked with the state. And where the state espouses the cause of the religion, or religion takes over the state, and both are true of the Middle East and South Asia. People are told that they would be taken to a homogeneous past, one which would be of one language, one culture, and one ancestry. And by rousing these ancient hatreds of the past, people have managed to divide societies which were reasonably functional until then. I think we see that in the Balkans. We see that in many countries of Africa as well. I think if we bring onto the table all these other aspects, we might have a better chance of analyzing why people are receding into the false comfort of an imaginary past which was golden and which was true and pure. And racism and xenophobia are active ingredients in this discussion. Immigration. Today, 3% of the world lives in countries other than where that person has been born. That's 250 million people. And almost all the wars, I mean it figuratively, almost all the battles in the election field are around these immigrants. That could be the ones who are on the other side of the border in Mexico. That could be the Turkish people in Germany. That could be the Algerians who came to France. But we are really talking about 250 million people in a world of 7.5 billion. But they seem to be deciding how the politics should go. And that tells us something, that it's through fear, it is through a kind of disquiet that is promoted by the presence of the so-called outsider, that countries' politics are being led. The United Kingdom has 60 million people in that country. It's got, 5 million immigrants? And the politics of the country has been going on around that. France, Germany, all these countries are fighting because of that. Religion and nationalism. Hemant has already mentioned to us and shown to us how vicious and damaging and dangerous religion and religious fanaticism could be. Imagine when these two are combined. And this is what is happening today. Whether you will repeal the Johnson Amendment, whether you will let churches play a political role, whether you will have the moral police take over, whether you will have new interpretations of who belongs to a country, all this is happening in all the countries. And it should make us wake up, because this is one of the most dangerous things that can be documented in the last 78 years. The wars are an indication of that. I will conclude by saying some of this confusion is caused also because of the American thinker Samuel Huntington, who produced this fraudulent, at least misleading idea, which was a good tool for American foreign policy, from his article in Foreign Affairs about the clash of civilizations, as if civilizations are stable and constant and that they do not change at all, as if they are all the time ready and the fault lines of the world are along the civilization's lines. He wrote in 1993, it influenced American policy for at least 2 decades. It was a disaster for America, and it was spurious as intellectual contribution to this discussion about culture and politics and civilization. I request you to look at the problem from these angles as well.
I want to begin by thanking the South Asian Humanist Association and the Ethical Humanist Society for the opportunity to be here with you tonight with this distinguished panel and to explore these crucial ideas that are challenging us all. And I'm going to begin with the context of the United States and then move to international context. Now, I became concerned with the rise of nationalism and religious fundamentalism in the Republican presidential primary. And what I thought should discredit a candidate was instead empowering that campaign. What we saw in that campaign were blatant appeals to American exceptionalism and bigotry and hatred of all sorts. And this appeals to bigotry and hatred was supported by conservative religious groups rather than denounced by them. And this was not a benign American nationalism that was just referred to by Howard. It was not a nationalism that was inclusive and democratic, and it wasn't a type of religion that embraces difference and change, but rather what was growing was a national identity and religious commitments that bond precisely by devaluing and excluding others, and that bond by valuing leaders that are, and these three crucial things, simple, powerful, and punitive. In short, forms of national identity and forms of religious community that are resolutely and unapologetically authoritarians. So, my friend, this is what is at stake in the world today. We are in a struggle for the very soul of democracy and all that we hold dear: interdependence, reason, compassion, respect for all human beings, and stewardship of the natural world that sustains us is under direct, unabashed assault. We are experiencing a rise of authoritarianism in the United States that is as dangerous as the anti-communism of the McCarthy era of the 1950s, and it is potentially as deadly as the eradication of basic political and human rights for African Americans after the Reconstruction period that followed the Civil War. We're also witnessing a resurgence in authoritarianism not seen in Europe since the rise of fascism in the 1930s. Now, within the world of political science, there is a well-established analysis of what activates authoritarianism. And this analysis is both challenging in what it discloses and yet profoundly evocative in what it fails to see. Now, first, what it discloses. Throughout the world, there is a small part of the human population, roughly 25%, that remains authoritarian. Authoritarians value community based on hierarchy, order, and sameness. And, as I mentioned before, they respect leaders who are simple, powerful, and punitive. Authoritarians also take deep satisfaction in violence, as we've heard mentioned here, against those who are perceived as threatening and inferior. Now, 25% is bad enough, but then it gets scarier because there's a larger subset of the population internationally, roughly 50%, whose authoritarianism is episodic. It is not constitutive, but it is readily evoked under conditions of threat and extreme fear. Now, both forms are now on rise throughout the world, and the verdict of one leading political scientist is grim. Karen Stinner argues that gains in civil rights and increasing racial, cultural, and religious diversity will inevitably produce authoritarianism. She goes so far to conclude that the pace of social change must be curtailed and that democracy itself has to be limited in order to survive. Now, while this political science is clear in its diagnosis, it is also fundamentally flawed and intrinsically limited. And here is our hope, and here is our task. Now, the flaw. Authoritarianism is measured not by political beliefs, but by child-rearing values that are then correlated with specific positions. Now, before I read the choices, I'm going to ask you to join me in an experiment. Think to yourself and jot down, or just have in your head, what are your top 4 child-rearing values? Think about that. Take a couple of minutes. The top 4 child-rearing values that you think should be widely shared. Okay, now hold those in mind and listen to the choices as posed by the political scientist. Now, these are values that are set in opposition to each other, and people are asked to choose one over another. And as I read this, listen to what is captured and pay attention to what is missed, because I'm going to ask you to share with me some of your values. Now, here are the choices. These are the ones that are utilized by Karen Stinner. Obey parents or think for oneself. Follow rules. Exercise good judgment. Be well-mannered. Be responsible for one's own actions. Be neat and clean. Be interested in how and why things happen. Now, a second scale, and this is utilized by Mark Hetherington and Jonathan Weiler. And again, these are set in opposition. Respect for elders, independence. Obedience, self-reliance. Good manners, curiosity. Well-behaved, considerate. Now, did they leave anything out? Is there anyone here who had some values that you think are important that weren't on this list? Anyone can speak up. Empathy. Yeah, empathy. What else? Honesty, yes, crucial. Others?
Love.
What?
Love.
Love. I know. It's kind of big, isn't it? Love, honesty, empathy. Any others? Kindness. Now, what is missing in this, and every time I've done this with audiences, is that we talk about what's missing is kindness and fairness and compassion and honesty and cooperation and service to others. And what is actually set in opposition are values that actually sustain and evoke each other. I don't know about you, but the way I was raised, that the reason to be well-mannered is because you're considerate. That's not in opposition. The reason to respect one's elders is because they've supported our independence. It's not either or. Now, the significance of this is that Stinner and other political scientists say we have to choose between authoritarianism and libertarianism through a cohesive community or free-wheeling emancipated individualism. And what they are missing in this false choice is not only these values of empathy and kindness and honesty and love and service to others. What they are missing is what we as humanists honor and uphold, and that is the desire for generative interdependence, not just independence, interdependence. What we desire is a community that fully values diversity and connection, all right, that nurtures creativity and scientific rigor, that embodies responsibility for others and the freedom to be an individual, the freedom to find new and better ways of creating expansive human communities of connection, respect, and cooperation. So then, folks, what is the real choice? A cohesive order based on creativity and collective problem solving, or a cohesive community based on hierarchy, violence, and sameness. So at this moment in history, we can and are combating authoritarianism and exercising countervailing power. We are living for justice and saying no to hatred. We are saying no in our votes, no in our laws, no in our policies. And yet it is vital to remember that our no to hatred, to fear, and to violence is grounded in a deep, a generative, and an expansive yes. A yes to difference, to the rich, a yes to the richness of diversity, to the gift of reason, to the joy of cooperation, to the deep satisfaction of compassion. We are here tonight to learn from each other. We are here to support each other. We are here to work together to keep alive the promise of freedom, the joy of compassion and cooperation, and the very soul of democracy. Thank you.
Those were fantastic opening statements. So unless one of you had wanted to speak on another's opening statement, I mean, I can always get you started with a couple of notes that I was taking, because you all said fantastic things. kind of marrying what Howard and Babu said, the idea of originalism and also the nostalgic of an imaginary past. That seems to be something that if you're a student of history and myth and religion, it's just something that's almost kind of like an inherent component of almost any community. Do you think that this is a tool that's necessary for people to unite, which unfortunately it's a tool that kind of breeds the nationalism and fundamentalism that we're talking about today. But do you think there's a way that it's necessary for us as groups to have that kind of united past? And is there a way for us, if it is a necessary tool, to utilize that in a way that will promote diversity and unity and what we all as humanists kind of seek to have in the future? Anyone, feel free.
I think you bring up an important aspect of what we raised, which is how do we deal with our past? Because the construction of the past is a very complicated thing. It is open to revision, sometimes with no dependence on facts. In South Asia, we know that, especially in India today, there is a very active attempt to create an India which 2,000 years ago had flying planes. 3,000, 4,000 years ago had interplanetary rights for the holy men. Now, this was something that has been taken for granted. The stories of mythology are now given attributes of science and technology. In the Indian Science Congress has been presented a paper which says that in ancient India, the head could be transplanted onto another body because that is how Lord Ganesha got his elephant head. I must tell you something about competing pasts fighting with each other, because if the Indians are proud, so are the Egyptians. And the Egyptian comes to the Indian with a lot of pride and says, when we were doing archaeological survey of the pyramids, we found telephone cables. That establishes that several thousands of years ago in Egypt, we had telephones. And the Indian looks at him sneeringly and says, you know what, in our archaeological digs, we did not find any cables. That shows we had mobile phones.
One of the things I'd like to address this question. I've learned so much from working for many years with Carolee Sanchez, who is from the Laguna Pueblo, and one of her colleagues, Leslie Marmon Silko, writes about a very different way of remembering and being cohesive from the past. Because what Silko talks about, and this is true of the Pueblo tradition, is that you remember the past and you honor the past because you remember the mistakes as well as the successes. And so that's the whole figure of the trickster figure. And so she talks about that a community that's based in honoring how they've gotten it wrong. And you have a sense that you can get it wrong as well, but you could also be part of a resilient community. And as Silko says, that you learn that you're never the first to make a deadly mistake. You're never the first to suffer a grave injustice. And you're never the first to have a community that is honest enough to see that and to take it on and challenge it. And of course, this is one of the things that we're forgetting about the very foundation of democracy, which is it's a social compact that's there because we screw up. We need checks and balances. And so rather than an identity that's based on the glorification of a past that's completely pure, there's a glorification of a past that generates deeper connection and honest facing of problems and together solving them rather than pretending that they don't exist.
I think one of the things we have to address is who is teaching history and what are they teaching to begin with. I don't know about anybody here, but when I was taught history, I should say, in school all the way up through high school, we never learned about the advances that were done in China, the Mayan calendar and their mathematics. It was all Eurocentric. I mean, Gutenberg, according to what I was taught, was the first person who ever used a movable type. We know what happened in China about 2,000 years beforehand. History is, as they say, written by the victor. And when you are talking about a mindset that says our tribe is better than everybody else's, that's what you're taught. One of the biggest discussions that I'm getting online these days is a idea, and I think it was put forward by a gentleman, may have been in Park Ridge up here, I'm not sure, about how to teach religion in school as a subject. Not teach religion, teach about religion. And there are so many people in our community who are afraid of the idea of teaching it because one teacher may run with it and go, he's going to teach Christianity. Oh, they're doing that in math classes now. I mean, why should we not have a structure for teaching what humans actually have done? And I think what we need to do is start with the idea of how do we get a comprehensive picture of what we're all about versus the nationalism that, is being taught to. I've got one of my best friends lives in Scotland. He got the same thing, but from a Scottish point of view. Every group does the same thing, and we need to be able to not internationalize education per se, though that would be a good idea, but be able to get good history going. My biggest thing in history classes all through school is you'd get to about maybe half the book, then school year would end. You start over again the next year with almost the same information. You'd have to cheat to look at the back of the book to find out what really happened.
I would only add that one thing I've been disturbed by every time I hear people talk about nationalism in our country is just the lack of references to history. It seems like it's the people who understand the history, and they've seen these patterns emerge in our country and other countries too. They know how this story goes. This is not news, what's going on in our country now. The policies we're trying to enact now, this is not new stuff. And the people who can reference back to that history, who understand it, they tend to be in the minority side here. And that's what's scary. So if we don't teach that history, if people don't understand it, which is what Howard is getting at, yes, it's a cliche, but yes, we're doomed to repeat it too, which is why it's so important to understand that these things have happened. We have the luxury of knowing how this story plays out in different countries, in different eras. It is in so many ways similar. And it's stupid for us to just ignore all of that and say, we're the best, we're number one, and it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about us here. This is anybody, anywhere. No one group is victorious in all of this forever.
And believe me, you don't have to wait for me to ask questions if you want to comment on each other's.
Seriously.
Yeah.
What I think, too, that's interesting to learn from different cultures, and again, I want to think this is from not only the Laguna Pueblo, but there's also a book that I highly recommend, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So someone here knows it, yeah, and you know what I'm going to talk about. Because here, there's a sense of identity, which isn't based just on glorifying the past. It's that you are deliberately aware of what your group's particular form of human evil is. And so you can then check it when it begins to emerge rather than let it get out of control. And so talking about the people that Robin Wall Kimmerer comes from, the form of evil that she describes is the Wendigo. And the Wendigo is the creature, you know what that is, that has a sense of an insatiable hunger and greed and doesn't care who else suffers as long as your greed is satisfied. And she says we see this in global markets, right? There's hunger. There's always for more and more and more, and there's never enough. And so sometimes people like who are Euro-Americans will romanticize Native American cultures as naturally knowing how to be in harmony and live in relationship to the land. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's because children are taught about the Wendigo and that it's in them. And there is that greed, and when they see it, they call each other to account and stop it, and they tell the history that goes all the way to the end of the book. Right, where you look at how the ideals were broken and how, again, you were able then to do something better. And so I think it's very important that I think it's a kind of contest for every national group to not only say what are our values, what is our particular way of screwing things up. Right? And so what do we need to always check? And, of course, in the United States, part of it is it's the Wendigo. It's greed and insatiable consumerism. But I'm sure there's a few others.
I think important point raised by Howard is how do we teach our history? because history could be seen as a story of conquest, but not of one human over the other, but of the human over the conditions in which the human species evolved. Look at where we are. Look at where we started 10,000 years, 12,000 years ago. And what a great achievement this has been for this race, which 200,000 years ago perhaps started as the child of one mother and a family of one mother, left Africa in a tribe of 10,000 people, and it has become 7.5 billion. I mean, this is the most successful race, and there have been different groups of people in different parts of the world who have contributed to its success, to the great achievements, and there have been so many. But it is through division and dominance that these stories are told to us. It's never shown as the common achievement of humanity. I have repeatedly encountered this. As you have said, the Chinese 2,000 years ago, the moving type, but the Koreans 3,000 years ago. So
I didn't read that book, I'm sorry.
It wasn't printed in the right moving type. Okay. But isn't it fascinating that every time we know that our achievements go deeper into our past, we should be so proud that you see in the pyramids that there are instruments which could have only been used for rhinoplasty. And that's 2,000 years even before the claims made on behalf of India. I am so proud because I'm human. I don't have to be Egyptian to be proud of what the Egyptians did. But this idea that we have as a species done so many things and achieved so much is not taught. In fact, the textbooks of Middle East are teaching violence and discrimination and justifying murderous violence against the Jews and anyone else who is not with you. I am sorry that also in my motherland and in the countries around, the similar trend is catching up. There are lessons in school which are aimed at promoting a sense of hatred, maybe even a sense of victimhood in certain groups of people so that they grow up and then they're ready to kill because they believe that their ancestors were attacked by someone else. And it's very curious. In India, one sees the Israeli claim or the Jewish claim dominantly made that they are the chosen people, and they say, how racist can that be? Forgetting that almost all of us in India say India is a chosen land, Aryavarta, and the Aryans were the ones who have established the Hindu culture. So there is no sense of critical evaluation of our own claims or boasts of greatness. So the lack of critical evaluation, a system of education which doesn't allow us to appreciate the greatness of humankind, its achievements, and what should be protected and preserved. This common heritage of humanity is being ignored in favor of some holy book, in favor of some imaginary achievement of a king in the past, mythological or historical. That is messing up things. Have we not seen that history is being talked of again all over the world? Everyone's talking about their own ancient history of the clan, the totem, the group, the race, and they're making claims of greatness for themselves. Maybe, I can't draw a direct link, maybe all this started with some extra energy after the bipolar world became the unipolar world. There's no more aligning along some kind of countries and dominance and principles. It's a free-for-all that has established itself. That's the feeling I have.
I think what you touched on, though, is an interesting point. People don't look at humanity as a whole. It goes back to a tribalism. It's us versus them. And, some people may not consider themselves that they would die for a piece of land, but they're sure as hell going to be upset if somebody happens to cut through their yard. It's still an us versus them. Well, it's what we need to do is see within that tribalism the roots of nationalism, what do we do to get rid of the feeling that we do have to do an us versus them? And let's face it, that's what Trump peddled, and he brought out something I always thought was dead and gone. I mean, I thought a lot of that was back, 40, 50, 60 years ago, gone. It's amazing how much of it apparently was still festering out there.
Yeah. If I can jump in. So what you said about we should all be celebrating our common humanity and our achievements as a species, that sounds wonderful. So when you see it breaking down with the nationalism, when we see it, this is a joke I've heard many times before, but no country's national motto is we're number 2. Everyone thinks they're the best. It's the same thing we see with religion too, that it's my religion has the pathway to salvation. Everyone else is wrong about it. It's the same sort of I'm right, everyone else is wrong. That is the us versus them situation. So I guess my question to the rest of you is, when you see that festering up again, how can you get people off of that when they're so convinced that their country is the best, that their tribe is the best, their religion is the best? Because reason seems like an illogical way to approach it, because
emotionalism is stronger.
Yeah, so what's the best way to bring that down before it gets worse?
Well, one of the ways that has been shown to be effective, and this is good for the long haul. I mean, it's not, we're not sure of how to contain it now once it's unleashed, but it gets back into the very particular part of education. And a kind of education is that it's easier to catch a particular kind of mistake if you're told about it before you're exercising. And I want to give you an example. There's a social psychologist, Albert Bandura, who talks about what he sees is the way in which moral disengagement or moral ideas are used to justify atrocities. And I was lucky to have the chance when I was teaching at the University of Missouri in a place that's very conservative. And we were teaching Bandura. And the processes of the way morality is used to justify immorality is, first of all, you're convinced that you're a bearer of a good cause. And then when you see negative consequences, you say, well, they're not that bad. I'll say collateral damage, right? And then if you can't deny how bad they really are, well, then you blame the victim, right? They're not like us. And then if you say not only blaming the victim, well, you have a role in it, well, you say, well, no, I was just following orders. So I taught this to these really conservative students, and then the news came out about Abu Ghraib and the torture that was done there, and they saw in real time all of that. Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, at one time says, well, we're nothing like them. We don't behead our victims, right? We just torture them. But what was fascinating, these conservative students saw through those lies. But it was because I taught them the rationale beforehand, so they could see it. Now, if I had tried to get Lindsey Graham to see that, he wouldn't be able to, because it was fully going on. But this gets to the past, the thing that from the nation of the Wendigo. If we teach ourselves how we make mistakes, and then we can call them on it. It's important that we celebrate our achievements, but we also learn that there are typical ways that we also fool ourselves with deadly consequences.
One of the things I've seen in a lot of the ex-religious communities is that some of the most powerful voices to, for example, reform radical Islam are ex-Muslims or people who are moderate Muslims who hate people who have hijacked their faith. They are the most powerful voices we have against it because people take them more seriously. You've lived it. I wonder, when it comes to nationalism, how powerful it is, because I don't feel like it has the same impact to hear someone from the U.S. talk about the atrocities we've committed. It doesn't seem to have the same impact. I don't know if that's true or not. But I know when I hear former, radical people from one religious faith or another, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, speaking about what is wrong with their religion, that carries weight. I don't know that it does with countries, because I don't know that I hear it that much, and I don't know if that is persuasive to other people.
You don't really see an ex-country.
Yeah.
But I think, responding to that point, you have to be in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh to know what the effect of being like that would be as regards a country. There is this cricket match between India and Pakistan. you're not allowed to have your favorite cricket team. You are born in India, so you better opt for the Indian team. Now, if there is anyone who celebrated somebody's achievements or good playmanship from the Pakistani team, you're offered to go to Pakistan and settle down there. But these are not said in gentle terms. These are threats. These are threats, and sometimes it's violent. One smart aleck then said, "Can I appreciate the New Zealand team? Because then he can be sent there." But these jokes apart, the ongoing hostile establishment of national identities that is happening is also linked to wars. Because there have been wars, there will be wars, and therefore there is China, there is... If you're a Communist Party member in India, then people assume that your loyalties are to China or to Russia. Then if you're Muslim, they assume that your loyalty is to Pakistan. Only if you are Hindu are you a nationalist. So when you say no to any of these elements, a whole dangerous set of consequences will befall you. It's really very, very scary, because the tribal identities and the national identities are damaging people's freedom to think or express themselves, their preferences. So you can say I'm ex so-and-so religion, but as Howard said, there's no ex-country.
What that gets into for me is the idea of how that mindset translates over to, let's get back to the other part of our discussion here, fundamentalism. And how we have gotten to a point where, well, I mean, we've all seen the little stickers on the car that says protect religious freedom. But they're not protecting religious freedom. They're protecting their religious right to discriminate. And they've subverted the language, which obviously is a very important part of any propaganda, and which is basically what it gets down to, what we're talking about here. How do we, as a group of humanists, try to hijack the language back to something rational versus the emotionalism that fundamentalist religion can play with people? I mean, in the U.S., fundamentalism really caught on more in the 1920s. It was against the rise of what was called modernism. And we've all heard the song, "Give Me That Old-Time Religion." It was a antithesis to the idea of society evolving. Let's face it, every woman in this room should be in the kitchen chained to the stove without shoes. Children, there's a couple here, well, younger than we are at least. Sit in the back, don't make a sound. We're moving as a society closer to an egalitarian ideal, but they're still trying to drag us back to a Stone Age idealism that they see as either a way to keep power, which I think all of us know it is, or a way of reaching a salvation that they still can't define for themselves.
I think that kind of resonates with what Hemant was asking as well. How do we respond? And I don't think we have any choice other than reason and information, because we don't think for people. They have to think for themselves. And we have to package.
It's easier, though, to let somebody else do your thinking for you.
Indeed, as we have found out.
Yeah.
All that we can do is make sure, and I think there are two aspects here. One is the culture war we are fighting, and that's the war we are generally referring to. There is the other, to insist on the rule of law. And the rule of law is better protected and respected in the global north, the Western countries. But simply the act of don't let people murder others seems to be quite revolutionary in some countries of the world. When you have, and I think the criminality should be exposed as the criminality. Sometimes this comes from, as Hemant told us, the countries which make apostasy criminal to the extent that you might be killed for it. The king of Saudi Arabia, the late king of Saudi Arabia, he declared that atheists were terrorists. When you have no legal legislative system for making the law, the king's opinion and decrees are the law in the country. Now imagine the expression of your idea is considered terrorist, whereas the chopping off of hands, the chopping off of heads, the lashing of people by 1,000 or 10,000 lashes, the killing of people in the public square is not considered terrorist. Now we have to fight that. The arena where we have to fight that is the United Nations. Trump has declared his war on the United Nations too. But that is the only thing available today as a tool for us from where we can defend this. And it has to be done. Sadly, with the help of countries like the United States, but not only, even Saudi Arabia can be the chairperson of one of the human rights groups at the UN. That has to be stopped. Moral outrage has to be expressed by the citizens of the country. And this did not only happen with Trump around, it happened also with the previous regime. So sometimes you see that the national interests of any country are really the same, whoever is ruling. So they must be held accountable by the enlightened citizens in the country. You must stop them from supporting Iran and Saudi Arabia or, I don't know, North Korea. Well, North Korea is not friends with America today, so they will not let that happen. But these are all commercial interests. How did Gaddafi, who was a close friend of many, suddenly become a bad guy? Who gave the arms to Syria? These questions have to be raised, and we have to show under international law that these are violations of human rights. This is parallel to the effort of winning the culture wars. But I can't imagine, and it's not our experience, that people continue to believe in something even after knowing that it is not the truth. So we have to keep going at it. And that work does help. Our problem today is that the state has engaged in the promotion of violence, in the defense of bigotry, that we are facing so many troubles and problems in the non-Western world. Look at what happened in the UK. The UK, last elections, I think 12% of the UK vote went to the UKIP, United Kingdom Independence Party, because there's this other aspect which we didn't mention till now. The rise of nationalism is also from the perception of loss of sovereignty. So many people in the UK have felt that they don't make their laws anymore. It's a false impression, but that's their impression. It's not because they're racist, and I think we must be careful. Everyone saying, let's go out of the European Union is not a racist. They have a sense of discomfort. What has been said to them to allay their fears? Not much. An accusation that they are racist has been thrown against them. So about 12 to 14% of the United Kingdom voted for the UKIP. But look at the recent elections. It took 2 years of active information dissemination by all those people who were worried by this. And it's come down by 13%. The support to the UKIP has come down by 13%. They have no members of parliament now. We have to keep going at it as they are. I think terrorists have globalized their activities, but we humanists, people who stand for liberal ideas, for democracy, human rights, lacking the resources and sometimes the vision, do not have a global movement. Imagine that on UK television, a leader of one of the Islamic communities is brought to the studios, and he's referred to very innocently by the anchor, and the anchor says, as a British Muslim, he says, no, I'm not a British Muslim, I'm a Muslim in Britain. Look at how their sense of loyalty, nationhood is created. You can't fight it simply by scolding them or penalizing it. We have to give them a reason to feel that they belong. And that means we have to support the liberal sections in their communities to come out. It's a complex approach we have to take. There's no one single solution because we are not handling one single problem. It's so many of those which have come together. I think if we kept doing this, at least we stop falling even further down the slope. Because we have had a rapid downfall in the last 15 years or so. having said that I'm scared, I'm not pessimistic. I'm just worried that not enough seem to be waking up to the immensity of the problem. But humanity has always been winning. We have not really slid back. Even the problems of the Middle East, if you look at it carefully, it is after the arming of people by Western powers that they got the tools to destroy themselves. There has been an active promotion of fundamentalist religion, a loyalty to the word of the Quran, promoted by the Western powers. Where did the Taliban come from? Who funded them? Who's made them sit in the camps to study and to become a jihadist? How did the Mujahideen get created? These were the products of an active educational work, a wicked educational work, promoted by the Western forces.
If I would add to that when you feel oppressed, when you feel like they're coming after you, that mission is strong, to fight back against it, to push back. And yes, that can be used for evil, as we've seen in many places. At the same time, I mean, this is what we're seeing right now, at least within liberals here, which is that, okay, we feel like we're in the minority, we're losing elections, but now you're seeing pushback with town hall meetings, you're seeing it with people getting engaged. And I guess the question is, how long can we keep that going? Because that will fade away over time. Will it last through another election? So, I mean, the same forces that can create evil and can give it the power, and it feels like there's so many of them and it's hard to stop, it can be used in the other direction too, but it requires more people getting engaged. And I think one of the things that's hard to battle is apathy for all this stuff. You need people who are engaged, informed, willing to fight against it, and it can be hard to keep that up over time.
If you don't mind me mentioning, first of all, we've got about 15 minutes before questions, but if you don't mind me interceding and adding this, what about the fact that I feel that there are global powers who use this fundamentalism as a tool, whether it's the nationalism intrinsically or also that religious fundamentalism that they feel like is tied to their identity? Are they using it as a tool effectively across the world? Is there a way for easily to break us? Do they understand the long-term repercussions, and are they in their favor or not? I mean, just to dwell on that a little bit.
I think it's the method and the tactic of all evangelical religions to do this. There are some religions, some ideas which claim universality, and some which are universalizing. And the great strength that Islam gets is from the fervor of evangelical Islam, which is also matched by the power and the money and the billions that Christian evangelists pump into different parts of the world, even making the same claims of miracles that they make in the name of Jesus. We've exposed people in my country, those who have come from Norway and elsewhere, and said they brought back to life dead people. Have you noticed that they never bring back to life dead Norwegians? They come here because the law here is not applicable to them. But back home, these guys will be put in their place. So there is this, that they are powered by the money and they're powered by the passion of their religion. Now, it's very strange. Hinduism, you have to be born a Hindu, and you can't really convert into Hinduism, because if I convert into Hinduism, which caste will I be put in? I have to be born in a caste, which is what explains the limited success of the Hare Rama, Hare Krishna movement and so on. But some of the leaders of the Hindu groups have said the world will become Hindu very soon. And they've established some targets. They've also established some targets very close to now for making India a Hindu state as a first step. And the globe will be converted to Hinduism. Was it not the first religion? Was it not revelation? And is it not simply a way of life that takes you to higher forms of existence? And therefore, the world will come to it. If not in this world, the next birth. But you will come there ultimately. So this is the assumption and the claim being made. That's how this works. And parallelly, the power of the market, because everybody is trying to expand the market. They're like these viruses, this flowing lava which wants to engulf any place somebody has some money, you want to turn that person into the object of your selling, make him, just take every person as a market, not as a human. These are happening in parallel, I think. I would request everyone to consider that as well. I think the enemies of humanism are not simply religious tendencies. It's anything that denies the dignity to every human. Howard gave a beautiful definition of what humanism is. I think anything that denies the centrality of the human as a human, does not let the human get the dignity that is due to him or her, is anti-human. Every authoritarian tendency in society, every fundamentalism, every imperialism that is there on people's minds or their hearts is anti-humanist. And we, I think as a movement, do not do enough to address the non-religious oppression, I mean not religious rather than non-religious, oppression of the human personality. We have to broaden our embrace. Our humanity is destroyed by more things than just religion. And we should focus there as well.
I want to get back to yours. I don't think there's a central cabal somewhere in the world that's controlling everything. But let's face it, religion and, nationalism, when you get down to it, is a control mechanism. And it's a good way of keeping people in line while you're fleecing them. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we saw this happen with Trump, for example. His knowledge of things religious could be fit in this glass, and there'd still be half of a room for it. But he was able to use that to garner votes from the people who felt that that was the message that they were looking for. And it's going to be a control, and there's going to be people who are going to learn how to take advantage of that. And I think that's what we have to guard against too, is the setup where people can fall into that.
Also the sense of insecurity. I'm not sure how much it has been reported here. A large sample survey in India of young people saying would they be happy with a dictatorship got the result that most of them would welcome a dictatorship. Now, the love of dictatorship by young people, this is, I think, very, very important. When you look at the West, the supporters of the UK, the supporters of Marine Le Pen in France, the supporters of the Freedom Party in Austria, the ones in the Law and Justice Party in Poland, it's interesting. They're all people in their 50s and above that are supporting these kind of things. Now, I'm talking about a survey of people in their 30s in India, and the majority of them said they would welcome dictatorship. If you look at the demographics, it's scary, because if this is in any way representative of the country, this year India is declared the youngest country of the world. More than 50% of India is under 35 years of age, which means the next 30 or 35 years, even going by today's life expectancy, they will be influencing the politics of the country. So for the next 35 years, we will have in the country people who will be thinking probably that dictatorship is welcome. Can you even imagine what the consequences of that would be? That's a scary thought.
We have about 8 minutes before we were scheduled to have question and answer. So before we get to that, is there any final thoughts that any of you'd like to leave, like a 2-minute statement or something like that? No? No? Will you?
Jump into questions?
Sure. It sounds like you guys are eager for that. So I think the easiest way to set that up is that I'm going to turn my microphone around. And before I do that, I'm going to ask people to line up right here. And I think just as some guidelines, we're going to ask for succinct questions around 30 seconds. Please make sure that it's a question and not a statement. Questions usually end like this, if that helps. If you go on a little too long, I'll try to move along to make sure that we can get enough of everybody's questions if they have got questions for an individual or the whole panel. I know it's intimidating being in front of everyone, but believe me, it's just fine. It's fine. Yeah, here, come on. What I'll do is I'll pull this away so that like it's not on camera if you don't want to be.
All right. We live in an age where global travel is available to common people. Information is everywhere. The internet, TV, media, which would all seem to negate the propagation of nationalism and religious fundamentalism. And yet it doesn't seem to be having that effect. Shouldn't it be going down instead of up? Why?
Yeah, it seems like the flow of information, at least especially online, all the stuff we're talking about with religion dividing us up, nationalism dividing us up, it seems like with this free flow of information, we're just finding new ways to divide ourselves up. And it doesn't necessarily have to be limited by our nation's boundaries. I mean, the demographics show more people, at least here, are becoming less religious, but we can do it by political party. Even among liberals, you can divvy it up. How pure are you? And if you don't believe the same way I believe, we're going to fight about it. I mean, it's fractal how much this, branches off. So, yes, all this information is out there, but if you're not the same way, with whatever subject I'm passionate about, if you don't agree to it or look at it the same way I look at it, we'll find a way to argue about it. And there will be new factions online, too. So at least from what I've seen, yes, there's all this information out there. You would think it should be going down. And instead, maybe some of the old ways, the nationalistic ways, the religious ways, maybe in some places those aren't as powerful, but we've just figured out new ways to divvy ourselves up.
Well, it goes one step further. You may have an interest in the subject. How many people do you think are actually going to look up both sides of the issue? Study after study, all the polls I've seen, that people who tend to be Trump supporters aren't reading New York Times. They're not reading your column. They're sticking. You got a good column. I like reading it. They're sticking to Fox News. They're sticking to the conservative Newsmax, all of the ones that feed their biases. The information's out there, but if you're not accessing the information, it could be a black hole somewhere.
And just to add to that, with all the information that's out there, it is so easy to go to what Howard's saying. It's so easy to silo yourself into hearing just what you want to hear, whereas when there wasn't that free flow of information, you kind of couldn't ignore the stuff that was out there. Now you could totally ignore entire swaths of information.
Yeah, growing up, we had three networks on TV. 4 if you got some of the other channels from the distant towns. How many news channels are there out there today, just on broadcast TV, let alone the internet?
I just want to add one thing. In this country, 14% of the population is immigrant. I have knowledge of the South Asian communities, and you'll be surprised at how much of a cultural ghetto they all live in. They come to this country, they stick to themselves, they socialize amongst themselves. Most things happen within the community. They never meet any person who is not of their skin color, either black or white, outside their work context. And they go back to where they come from for selecting their life partners. They have their same religious ceremonies as back from there. They bring their own superstitions from there with astrology and geomancy. You'll be surprised. There are people staying here but living back in India. And that is an indication. You are talking of travel, which is probably 10 days, 15 days. There are people here living for a few decades and organize cricket. It's a sport, cricket match between 2 different castes living in this country. And they're announced that way. Imagine having a cricket contest between white people and black people. Having 2 different castes having this and advertised prominently. Because the politics back home is around castes. I take this opportunity to mention this. Now that DNA is a word that everybody uses, people are finding new ways of justifying the caste system, and they are invoking the DNA. So on behalf of SAHA, the South Asian Humanist Association, we are challenging, asking celebrities and people who influence public opinion, Hemant, you should join, to undergo a DNA test to determine ancestry, to just simply show that we all have origins very different to what the mythological assumptions are about where the Aryans came from and what a typical Brahmin or a Kshatriya or whoever else is. We have put out the pamphlet out there. Caste is cancer. We need to challenge it, even in the immigrant communities of North America.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Beth. I'm a member of the Southwest Humanist Society. I have a question for any one of you four. It has to do with community, which expands ultimately to nationalism, to statehood, whatever you want to call it, because we all need family, and the expansion of family is the schools and the churches and the communities that go beyond that. So how do you find a happy balance? Now, my community is humanism, and I think it is the niftiest in the whole world. And I want everybody to be a humanist, just like Jefferson wanted everyone to be a Unitarian. Nevertheless, you need a balance. You need an understanding. You need, I think, the day after the 4th of July, a love of country. And I'm not ashamed of my love of country. But I'm also very sad about some of the things that my country has done. Now, I'm a retired teacher, and one of the things that we have often deplored, at least the good teachers like me, would say that our students don't understand critical thinking. And that needs to start not only in the kindergartens, but from mother's knee. How do you go about doing that? So there are really two questions.
Well, at least to the first part, I would say, it shouldn't be this opposition to say, this is our tribe, this is our group, we love our group, we bond with our group, and that automatically means everyone else is a problem. That's kind of the problem with that, right? There's a way to say, look, this is our family, we work together, we support each other, but someone who's not in it, they're not our enemy. We don't have to treat them as such, and that gets lost sometimes when because we all know the groups who are out there that say, okay, this is how we all connect with each other, and anyone who disagrees with us is wrong, they need to be stopped, they need to be eradicated, what have you. There is a way to teach that. Humanist communities are one of them that say, okay, we may bond in our community, but everyone else isn't evil, everyone else isn't wrong. We got to spread that sort of mentality. That's hard to do, but there is a way to do it. As for the critical thinking aspect, as a former teacher, believe me, I think this is something a lot of teachers talk about, which is how do we get students to ask better questions? How do we get them to think about these things from different angles? It's a hard thing to teach, but I can tell you, at least when I was in the classroom, that trajectory was going younger and younger to try to get them to think about this stuff in different ways.
Hi, I'm a former teacher also, and what I'm wondering is what do you think it is in our psyches that seems to naturally have this drive to identify into a category of some kind? And with that, if you could talk about your ideas about, I guess, how, is that a deficit that is present? Is that something that is taught? I wonder a lot about the psychological health, especially in America, of our children. And, we have a really high divorce rate and, a lot of people who are not getting their mental health needs met. And if you could, talk about your thoughts on how that plays into the nationalism and the religious fundamentalism. Thanks.
I really want to hear Sharon's take on this. One thing I would add is it's been really neat to see, at least in our country, a lot of those tribal lines that we've used in the past, things like race. We're getting to a point where there is so much racial intermingling, racial marriages that, I mean, I don't know what my kid's going to say in the future, like, because she has mixed race parents or something, but that's more common. Even with gender, there is a discussion that it's not just a gender binary. So all those categories we used to say, okay, I'm in this group and that group, or what? How many independents are we seeing politically? So people are breaking out of certain categories. And I think the question that you're kind of asking is, how do we do that more often? Or how do we stop limiting ourselves to saying how all these groups I have to be in or I should be in? You don't always have to choose for everything. There may be a way around that. It's starting to happen in some ways, so that's kind of nice.
There's one of the things that I think is fascinating in the different fields of social psychology is realizing that, and you know this, like part of the reasons why there are laws like against intermarriage and staying the same is because there's part of the human species that likes difference. You know, young people want that. They're curious. I mean, the values, they want to explore. They don't want to stay the same. Even like the Amish, for example, they'll have the wilding year where the young people can go out and explore different things. And so it's almost as though this longing for difference gets curtailed rather than nurtured and supported in responsible ways. And I think at some level that's what we're really in a struggle about, is not only the soul of democracy, but is our sense of humanity one that, as you were saying, we can be proud of ourselves, but also be proud and interested in other cultures and other nations. And one kind of thing that's very interesting about this, and this gets back to the political scientists and the data. So, so Stinner, who makes this mistake, you've either got to have just free-wheeling individuals, you're not part of a community, it's, nobody's very happy, or if you're in a community, it's a tribe, it's just me and mine. When they did the qualitative research, they found people who had measured on the scores as being libertarian were actually genuinely welcoming and curious about other people, rather than suspicious and afraid. And so I think we're in a struggle for what is the best in human. Is it the secure order of the same, or is it the delight of the different and the new and the playfulness of that?
Hi, Rajesh Kinney, I'm a humanist. So one of the solutions which you said was to go against Trumpism, what I would call Trumpism and anti-humanism, was to look at it from reason and critical thinking. But one of the things which you have seen is that even in educated communities, Trump has won those societies. I think we have reached a point where we are in it's like antibiotic-resistant bacteria. I mean, critical reasoning and all of those things don't work on this. My thinking is that we might need to have a better marketing for, or better, maybe we could get some Republican consultants into humanism and have them come up with better words or better ideas which we could market, like Obamacare, or all of that kind of things which are catchy. So I'm not sure critical reasoning and is going to be the solution for fixing Trumpism. I would like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
The question is, the rising fundamentalism has so much funding and support, and when it comes to humanism or human rights activists, people are not liberal in donations or come out in support. What are the strategies that we should take to improve this situation?
Yeah. First of all, if anyone has an answer to that, I'm pretty sure Democrats want to hire you because they don't have necessarily the answer. But I mean, the one thing that I think the reason a lot of people supported Trump, continue to support Trump, is because they feel part of something. They feel like they're part of, quote unquote, making America great again, or they're part of some broader movement, and they feel important, and they want to be part of that. And that's part of the appeal there. Yes, it goes against common sense in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things, I've literally heard this argument from people, let them repeal the Affordable Care Act, because if they do that, people will suffer, and then maybe finally they'll get it. why that's a bad idea. And of course, the other side of that is, no, we don't want them to suffer in order to figure this out. But that's the hard thing. How do you make them feel important? How do you make them feel part of a movement? I know I've heard this a lot online from people who supported Bernie Sanders, that the people who connected with him really felt like they were part of this bigger boat, whereas the people like Hillary Clinton was not necessarily that same level of uplifting and partisan. Obama was when he was running. So it's a matter of, when it's politically speaking, how do you get people to feel like they are part of something that is bettering humanity, that is part of something bigger than themselves? It's the same ingredients that Christian pastors use for those megachurches. You feel like you're part of something, even if, I think you mentioned it earlier, even if some of the things that they are doing is so obviously destructive to other people, they still feel like they're part of something bigger and important, so it's hard to break them from that. And one of the things, when I've talked to other atheists, it's an argument I make over and over. Just saying, here's an argument against God, here's why you should be an atheist, that's not enough. That's not enough for a lot of people. That's not something to be passionate about, per se. You got to give them more to join, because pastors, religious leaders, even the ones we all condemn, they know how to do that. They know how to make you feel important. So, I mean, to respond to you, I mean, Trump does that really well. Yeah. And the question is, how can you give people something that will motivate them, that will get them to feel like, I want to be part of this, I want to recruit people to be part of this. That's hard to do.
It also gets down to the idea of messaging. I mean, one of my favorite quotes, and I forget who said it back in history, but freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. When you get down to it, how do we get our message out? One of the biggest discussions we have continuously on the AHA board is, how do we get the message of humanism out? We send out press releases, I don't know how many a day. How many of the times have you heard of the AHA mentioned on the news, unless it's, oh my God, these ungodly humanists are taking away a monument that stood on public ground for 60 years. It's illegal, but it's still a monument that stood on the ground for 60 years. You were just writing about that not too long ago. It's called the Pensacola Cross. FFRF was involved with that case too. We upheld the First Amendment of the Constitution. We had a judge who said, I don't like it, but this is the law. All you ever heard is negative. You never hear the positive things that go on with our movement. I don't know how many people in this room listen to WCPT, the Chicago Progressive Talk. One of the things they keep bringing out is there are maybe, if we're lucky, couple dozen stations in the U.S. that handle all of the progressive talk shows that go on in the U.S. How many outlets throughout the country do Rush Limbaugh or Hannity or any of the others? They have the press, they have the means of promoting the message and promoting their ideals. Unless we can come up with some way of doing equal footing, we're not going to get as much traction as I would wish we would get.
I think perhaps there is this assumption, which I don't share, that all is okay with the American democracy. And therefore we have to look at Republicans and Democrats and maybe one other alternative. This is a seriously flawed democracy. You have no money, you can't be anywhere. And this presidency was on the strength of bullying, whimsical. What can you say about a boorish person who is threatening his own administration and his own judges? Forget North Korea, he's threatening your own judiciary. Now, this is not normal. Something has to be done. And that's not about the parties, it's about the voters. The voters need better education and orientation. I don't think you should only ever criticize the ones who are getting elected without the ones who have elected them. And something seriously wrong with the American system, like it is elsewhere. It's no defense of things elsewhere. In Iceland, a survey was done, and it was found out that no one under the age of 25 believed in the creation theory. Hemant, you know that. Now, can you imagine that? No one under the age of 25 was believing that the world was created. is a product of their education system. Now, is it not the statistic that 40% of Americans think that the sun moves around the earth? Now, fix that. If you can't fix that part, if you don't make sure people are properly educated, how will they come up with the right responses in the once in 4 years election exercises? There is something wrong there, something deeply worrying.
The problem isn't that they're not being taught that. It's that there are all the forces working against that sort of education, too.
Well, critical education, critical intelligence, you mentioned global travel. How many Americans actually have a passport? Now, there are other issues. Honestly, America is not part of this globalization. Europe is. American businesses are part of the globalization. Americans have not been. So I think there is something, I mean it only as a friend, that we have to look at how things are not working and how some of the assumptions we make about the world do not necessarily apply here.
Thanks for an interesting presentation. I'm not sure if Myanmar, i.e. Burma, is part of South Asia, but irregardless, they're continuing to persecute several of their ethnic minorities. And Aung San Suu Kyi, who's the effective leader of the government and the darling of Western liberals, hasn't really condemned that activity. Is that because she's afraid to alienate her Burman core, or is it because she's afraid to cross swords with the military, who still has a significant amount of power?
With no specialization in the subject, but my perception is she did her job, she got her country better human rights situation for her tribe, and she is not that committed for universal rights. This is my cynical conclusion about this Nobel Peace Laureate. She's not fully committed. And we should not forget that the two sides of the terrorist groups in Palestine and Israel, both of them got the Nobel Peace Prize. So,
thank you. It's been really wonderful. I'm Catherine Ross. I'm the president of the Ethical Humanist Society at Chicago, and thank you. I have one question, or it's in advertising and in marketing, it's kind of popular, at least now, to say that reason leads to conclusions and emotion leads to action. And I think that as humanists, as critical thinkers, as rational people, we have a real difficult time with our message, and that selling our position as something really wonderful is really hard in comparison to the wonderfulness that any fundamentalist can offer. And I think that's something that we really have to work at. Our Sunday school last year performed for our winter festival the story of everything from the Big Bang to now, and what was marvelous about it was that our creation story is adaptable, and I think that that's our really exciting thing that we have to sell, and that this is actually really marvelous, and we have that, and we need to share that with the world some exciting kind of way. I think there's a lot riding on it. So.
Yeah, this is one of the things religious people do really well. Ask someone who's born again, like, how did you find Jesus? They have that story for you. They can all tell it. They all have said it many, many times. It's hard to ask an atheist, when did you stop believing? And it's not necessarily a compelling, emotional, gripping story. And I think part of that is, especially for people who don't believe in God, we kind of know that emotion, the plural of anecdote is in fact. We don't rely on emotion. We know better than that. But you're right. The emotions are compelling, and telling a story is compelling. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the movement thing. If you could sell the story, it doesn't have to go in spite of what the facts are. You just got to find a way to tell what you believe in a moving way that is compelling. There is a way to do that. I mean, I've said this before in other venues, but when it comes to selling science or something, which doesn't sound as emotionally compelling as religion, you listen to Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson. We like them because they do it really, really well, and they can get you excited and inspired. Yes, we need that in politics too. We need that for ideologies as well. Like, why is humanism a better sell for the world? There are reasons for it. We're all better off when we do that. But you're right. It's a matter of how do we tell those stories. We need to find a way to do it because the other side of that coin does it really well, and they know how to do it.
And I think this is where one of the things I was getting, that's, you know, the story, another thing that's not told, and this is what all of you picked out that was left out, where it's not just, again, freewheeling, emancipated individuals who just do science. That the values that we have are kindness and compassion and, you know, again, service to others. And that is, I think, very compelling. And the joy of being part of a cooperative team, solving a big problem together, is something, again, that I think that we need to talk about as well. And so it isn't just the individual thinking and solving through, but the team that's doing it, and the team that's doing it because you're meeting someone's real need, all right, that there's a real problem, that people need to be fed and diseases treated and houses built and energy saved, and there's such joy in that. And I think those are stories we need to tell in a better way.
The problem, though, is with that, and I agree with you 100%, but when you look at it, from an individual's point of view, the individual doesn't see another individual suffering. We are right now. The state of Illinois is just in mental health services something like $25 to $35 million in arrears to providers who have been waiting a year to 6 months for their payment. In my area in Kane County, I sit on a tax oversight board that deals just with mental health payments. There are agencies that have to cut staff because they can't afford to keep 4 beds going for people in a women's shelter. There are places that have to cut mental health services because they can't afford the psychologists who are coming in on a part-time basis to help. You can't easily translate the individual story into a gestalt that is going to make a difference for other people. And a lot of this goes back to the Reagan years, where we went from an idea of service to community to a me-ism. You know, what am I going to do, and how is this going to affect me? I at one point went back for an MBA. I was talking to you earlier about the MPA, Public Administration, but an MBA. And people weren't going to get that because they thought it was going to do better for the community. Every single person in there, except maybe 2 people, said, yeah, I'm getting this because this is going to get me another $20,000 a year in salary. That's all they cared about. Had nothing to do with what they were going to bring to the community. It had to do what it was going to do to serve them. And unless we can do something to show people that government as community has to be there to help the lesser of the people around us, other than saying, well, it's not our problem, let a church handle it, it's going to get worse before it gets a lot better.
You know, one of a religious leader that I think helps address some of this that I've found very compelling, you talked about with, you know, Tagore and Einstein and Fromm, is Gustavo Gutierrez, who's the founder of liberation theology. And in getting that to the point, Howard, one of the things that he described is that the theology of liberation, it frees the oppressed from their exploitation and marginalization, but it frees the oppressor, who is only caring about getting another $20,000 a year. It frees the oppressor from their isolation and their arrogance. That there's something richer to really be able to care about other people than only to care about oneself. And it's a greater good.
But I think that's why all of us up here are humanists, because we do care.
I just want to add one thing to the good qualities that you have mentioned. Yeah. Have you seen how a typical humanist looks at the world? He's really burdened. He's troubled by the world and the world's miseries. How many humanists do you see can tell a joke or understand one? I mean, where is the humor for the humanist? I find it really very remarkable that humanists are happy to laugh at others, that's for sure. But a genuine sense of humor, able to take the world with a light heart, is not something you typically see. I think we must not give membership to anyone who can't tell a joke. So,
2 humanists walk into a bar.
I was promised one last quick question. I'm going to hold Babu to it. So,
my name is Babu Rakapudi. I am a lifetime humanist. I'm not a member here yet. A question is, except for Howard, this question applies to others. Why you guys, humanists, don't participate in elections as candidates? That's the best way to develop the democracy.
I have to run it by the family. I don't think they would be enthused.
But if they are, I'll work on your campaign. Yes. You got it.
Good thing I was running.
I don't have a vote in your country.
all right, before we head off for the night, I want to thank you all for your time. You've been fantastic. And if there's any way you want us to continue discussion with you on that infamous social media, would you like to share that now? I'm sure Hemant's got some avenues.
Friendlyatheist.com is my site, and there is a Facebook page for Friendly Atheists where we've been live streaming this, too. It's social media. You could find any channel you want. There will be people who will yell at you, and agree with you, so that's always fun.
My Facebook page is Babu Gogineni, and I think there are about 100,000 associated with it. It's simply my name, B-A-B-U, Babu, Gogineni, G-O-G-I-N-E-N-I. Everyone's welcome to comment, especially the ones who disagree or can tell a joke. I actually ran a joke competition just to lighten up things. There is so much to celebrate in life.
And I'm afraid I'm not yet part of this kind of connected world, so soon. But anyway, these two will keep it going.
I actually am not on any social media. I had my identity stolen a few years ago, and one of the things every expert told me to do was stay away from anything that says social media. However, I do have
That's very antisocial.
And I'm such an outgoing person, too. However, I do have email, and if anybody wants to email me at hkatz@americanhumanist.org, I will be happy to dialogue through email.
And humanism.asia, that's the site for SAHA. SAHA is one step over AHA.
AHA.
S-A-H-A, that is humanism, the regular spelling, not .com or org, but .asia, A-S-I-A.
Besides the American Humanist website, I think IHEU's website is a very, very good resource for people who are interested in the philosophy.
Yes. The International Humanist and Ethical Union, I've been its director for 17 years. IHEU.org is a collection, it's a union of nearly 120 organizations from 40 countries. And the humanist interests are represented at the United Nations, Council of Europe, UNESCO. The Freedom of Thought report, I recommend to everyone. Hemant gave a hint of what might be in that as content. It examines the countries of the world for the freedom of religion or belief that exists and impacts the humanist, the non-believer. I want to end on this. We are called free thinkers. They are the non-thinkers. And what the non-thinkers do to the free thinkers is well documented in this. It's free to download. That will help you get an overview of how it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. You've been fantastic. Thanks to the South Asian Humanist Association for pretty much being the catalyst of putting this on, and I wish you all a great evening and safe travels back home. Thank you.
Thank you.